This is Dinosaur Pee. Life was created in the water. Microorganisms, bacteria, plants, fish, mammals have adapted in it, they've adapted to it, they've even adapted it for their use. My daughter Zoe was born prematurely. A baby born at regular, 9-month gestation begins her life adapting to the world. From darkness to light, from amniotic water to dry, oxygenated air. In the NICU, the world adapts to the baby. In a constant negotiation between the watery space and this arid one, the CPAP machines help the baby breathe. Isolates keep the baby warm. Tubes through the nose and pipe through the esophagus into the gullet help the baby eat. But the baby, she adapts too. She grows and weans herself off the ventilator. She gets used to hands holding her instead of amniotic fluid. And the parents, they adapt too. Wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Ever since Zoe was born, from the early days in the NICU to the current, possibly permanent drought the Southwest is undergoing, water has been on my mind. Maybe it's because of the NICU stay, but I'm pretty sure this is endemic to all parents. Danger to the baby exists everywhere, like chemicals inside water. Water, the thing that everyone needs, not just preemie babies.
For much of the 20th century, the textile workers of America prided themselves on producing high-quality fabrics in mills across the country.
We here at the Center for Environmental Biotechnology study these exposures and study the relationship between human society and the chemical output that we produce, and then the repercussions both in the environment as well as in humans.
This drive to produce came at a price, though. The chemicals required to process and finish textiles, as well as waste products, were sometimes handled and disposed of improperly, leaving a legacy of pollution.
What's in here is like chemicals that are not degraded by biology.
A large number of chemicals actually can be detected in us, not only in adults, but even at birth. You can see some chemicals that are detectable, sometimes at problematic levels. These exposures continue as the baby consumes its first meal, typically breast milk. Another slew of chemicals is being presented to the baby, 70 to 80,000 chemicals that are in commercial use. And out of those, there's about 5,000 that are produced at more or consumed at more than 1 million pounds per year. People assume that whatever you find on the shelves of supermarkets are products that are inherently safe. But the truth is more complex. We really don't have the resources and the oversight right now to manage them all appropriately and test them all. So it turns out that out of the many chemicals that we use, only a small fraction actually has been tested for all its toxic effects.
I worried aloud to Rolf about breastfeeding my son Max. All the chemicals in breast milk stress me out. Our own bodies collect these pollutants. We pass them on to our babies. Good or bad, these excess chemicals have to go somewhere. Household chemicals, industrial chemicals, chemicals to make chemicals follow the water. The water pools. Sometimes it pools so thickly with chemicals that the pollutants get a special moniker, Superfund sites, that somebody has to clean up.
So we have hundreds of Superfund sites across the nation. It is saddening to see how we managed and disposed of chemicals in the past. Oftentimes we opened the back door and kicked the drum out, it rolled down into the canyon, and there it emptied out and oozed into the subsurface, and now bleeds off chemicals for a long period of time that enter the groundwater and then move down in what we call an underground plume of contaminants that can end up in drinking water supply. We felt that these chemicals are safe and benign, and so it was okay, the way we handled them. But we find out now that it isn't okay, and it costs, creates a lot of problems.
I complained to my kids that we in Flagstaff suffer the snow, while the fancy people in Sedona get all the water. We don't have a river in Flagstaff, only an aquifer. But if you follow Route 89 down Oak Creek Canyon, the aquifer pops up in springs, eventually becoming Oak Creek. We cruise through 9 life zones. Each of these layers reveals different adaptations of flora and fauna. We can also trace the water that flows from Flagstaff to Oak Creek all the way to Phoenix. As it continues, it meets contaminants along the way. As you follow Oak Creek, you might find yourself at Page Springs Winery. where Eric Glomsky chose to grow his wine because of his access to clean water.
We largely use the water to get the vines established, and the spring is our water supply. We, of course, research the quality of the water, etc., so water is important.
But what does quality water mean? Is it clean? The water that first appeared on the planet 4 billion years ago is the only water we've got. We do a lot of rough things to this dinosaur pea.
Generous sprays of water accompany every step of preparation.
We've forced the water to adapt to coal mining, oil drilling, uranium mining, rocket fueling, dry cleaning. We dump the chemicals into the water.
This is groundwater from the site that we're studying.
So the approaches that we take to clean it up is to find the best possible microorganisms and study when they feel comfortable, and then try to recreate these conditions in the subsurface.
The sediment in there represents the subsurface, and then we can feed microbes in there.
And oftentimes the organisms are already there, and all we need to do is kind of foster them so that they grow to a healthy density and begin to break down the chemicals. Microorganisms are kind of slick because they can, do all these types of reactions at ambient pressure and temperature, and they can completely destroy the chemical, taking it apart into its very basic elements without much cost. And also, since it can be done in situ, in the environment of interest, we don't have to bring the contaminant up, which always arises or brings the concern that we cause exposure of the field, of the people who work in the field, and then air exposures and so forth.
Bruce Rittman from ASU's Institute of Biodesign trains microorganisms to adapt to clean up water contaminated by nitrates and return it to regular, old dinosaur pee.
Nitrate is a very important material. It's naturally present in the ecosystems. But what we've done in human society is we've taken very large amounts of nitrate and we've dumped them into the environment from two places. One of them is from agriculture. It's just part of fertilizer. It also comes from a lot of wastewater, domestic wastewaters or sewage. And so once the nitrate gets out into the water body, pretty much nothing happens to it. It just transports along until it gets to places like the Gulf of Mexico and in other lakes and the ocean where sort of the water slows down. And here it becomes a nutrient.
Scientists announced this month the dead zone measures nearly 9,000 square miles.
There are microorganisms that will reduce nitrate to nitrogen gas. And to reduce is very simple. It means add electrons. All of life exists by moving electrons about. Microorganisms, human organisms, all organisms get energy by moving electrons around. And for microorganisms, nitrate can be the endpoint. We call it the electron acceptor. So they have some food, they transfer electrons around, they get energy and grow. Those electrons eventually end up in being delivered to nitrate, which is reduced to nitrogen gas. It bubbles out. Water pollution problem solved.
It's not only by paying attention to the very small microorganisms, but also to the slightly larger systems, like microclimates, that you can let nature find solutions to your man-made problems. A lesson Eric Glomsky learned the hard way when he tried to grow a big red grape in the bottom of his vineyard.
In this little vineyard right next to us, there's a gentle slope here. Well, this river valley here drains cold air all the way from Upper Oak Creek and the edge of the area that you'd call Flagstaff. And the cold air is more dense, and it literally each night flows down here like water. It flows across the bottom of my vineyard, and that bottom of the vineyard is radically colder than just 5 feet higher in this other block here. So for years and years, 8 years later, I still basically hadn't gotten a crop off those vines because they would either get frosted in the spring because of that extra cold air, or they would not ripen. We finally said, we've had it, so we planted a grape that we got from a nursery in New York that's a French-American hybrid, and that's just one of many examples where you learn about the microclimates you live in through farming, because it's so different buying your food in a store or living a lifestyle. And this is not to judge or criticize anybody. When you live a lifestyle where you're economic sustenance and you paying the bills and feeding your kids and housing, clothing, and taking care of employees, which are part of my family, is literally directly linked to the cycles of nature. You have no choice but to become very conscious of those things.
Perhaps a tiny bit of humility could help us see the end result of our fascination with cleverness.
And you watch and you look and you watch and you look and you build hypotheses and you try different things and you try to adapt. You learn a lot, you're humbled by nature for sure. And I try to tell everybody, because your tendency is, oh, let's go down in the flat area and don't we farm flat areas? I can't tell you how many people who have come to me and said, I'm going to go buy this little river bottom over here and plant grapes. And I was like, listen, if there's anything I can do to convince you not to do that, I mean, and I tell them my story, because there's a microclimate along the river here.
It takes a lot of time and trial and error to get the balance right. Dr. Haldon thinks we should try to foresee the end result before we start planting.
Green chemistry is the idea of producing or using a chemistry that relates to the chemicals that we see in nature. If we use chemicals that are present in nature already, nature typically is very well adapted to also remove them again and break them down and return the elements of which they are made up of back into the cycle of material and energy flow. So there's opportunities to just cut down on chemical complexity and better manage the flow of materials in our society.
Imagining not only the great things a chemical can do for us, but imagining where and how the chemical will end up is the kind of forethinking Dr. Haldon is calling for. If we're going to adapt the world and its water to suit our needs, it would be nice of us to adapt the water back. Or at least let nature adapt the water back to its original, relatively clean dinosaur pee. Glomsky invested in the green chemistry approach too.
There's no petrochemicals used in this vineyard at all. All fertility comes from cover cropping and composting. That's something we're very committed to too, because of this river here, not wanting to pollute the water.
Zoe's 12 now. Max is 7. I worry less about their immediate survival, but still worry about their long-term chances. Rising ocean and poisoned water. Max and Zoe will probably be okay. Their kids, their kids' kids. I keep looking at the tiny things for hope. The new possibilities of garnering energy from microorganisms and from waste. Solar shingles on rooftops. Bacteria that eat plastic. Like planting vineyards in surprising climates, humans make a mess, but then find ways to help nature clean it up. Every couple months, Max and Zoe clean up garbage on Huntington Street as part of their Taekwondo class community service. That's, I suppose, the human way. Lay it down and pick it back up.